Welcome to the Joy of Cruising podcast with your host, award-winning author Paul C. Thornton, a weekly conversation with the amazing cruisers featured in the Joy of Cruising trilogy, comprised of The Joy of Cruising, Cruising Interrupted, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again. Each book is a compilation of features about cruisers and cruise and travel personalities from around the world. It's the next best thing to cruising, hearing about cruising from the unique and diverse perspectives of Paul's amazing guests.
Hello, passenger cruisers. This is Paul. And this week on the Joy of Cruising podcast, I am delighted to welcome Donna K. Phillips. I wrote about Donna in my new release, The Joy of Cruising Again, in a section called The Fun Ship, where I featured Donna's dad, the cruise industry and Carnival Cruise Line food and beverage giant Everette Daniel Phillips, in a chapter titled Hot, Hot, Hot. Donna K. Phillips remembers her fun ship father. In the introduction to the fun ships, I wrote, Carnival Cruise Lines owned the brand and the space in the fledgling cruise market of the fun ships, essentially from its beginning, with the launch of Mardi Gras in 1972 and Carnivale in 1975. In 1977, Joe Farcus was commissioned by Carnival to design its third ship, the Festivale, and stayed to design its next 30 or so ships. Today, the retired Farcus is an internationally known icon of design. Shortly thereafter, food and beverage innovator Everette Phillips came to Carnival after stints with Morrisons Cafeteria, Eastern Steamship Line, Commodore Cruise Line with its dancing waiters, and Chandris Cruises, now Celebrity Cruise Line, and stayed at Carnival until retirement. The late Phillips was recognized universally by the cruise industry as a food and beverage giant. No one did more to bring to life the motto, the fun ships, than Joe Farcus and Everette Phillips. Perhaps that bold assertion is subject to discussion. If so, I invite anyone who can discuss it onto the Joy of Cruising podcast. Joe Farcus was on the Joy of Cruising podcast episode 30. Today, through the words of Donna, who shared much of her dad's experiences from the time of her first cruise with him at 11 months old through his retirement from Carnival in 1997, we get a sense of the fun ship's pioneer, Mr. Phillips, as he was known by the many people who worked with and for him. I met Donna a couple of years ago. I was talking to a friend about the premise of the Joy of Cruising, and she said, "You should speak with Donna Phillips. She's part of cruising royalty." Of course, that piqued my curiosity, and I asked if she could facilitate an introduction to Donna. She stated that she would, and then, shortly after our call, forwarded me an article shedding light on cruising royalty. The article was Carnival Family Mourns Food and Beverage Giant Everette Phillips, Sea Trade Cruise News by Ann Kolash, and quoted several former associates of Mr. Phillips, one of which I was familiar with, John Heald. I knew I needed to research Phillips and meet Donna. Donna K., welcome to the Joy of Cruising podcast.
Hey, good to be here.
Good to see you. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, it's a beautiful sunny day here in California, and I'm happy to be with you, Paul.
Good. Glad to have you. Before I ask you to talk about Everette Phillips, Mr. Phillips, your dad, tell the listeners about yourself, where you're from, where you live, your professional background, anything you would like to share.
Sure. I'm from Miami, Florida, the home of the first major cruise port in the world. And I was adopted there by my dad and my mom, and I grew up there. And then I moved out to try to go to New England, but I ended up in California. And I live on the Monterey Bay, a beautiful Monterey Bay in Pacific Grove, California, looking out right at the ocean, right from our house, and thinking about being out there every day. I'm a graphic designer by trade. I also was in a band, and I did music for a while. Then I met my partner who was on the radio, and we combined forces, and with my imaging background and her radio background, and we formed smoothjazz.com global radio back when streaming first started in 2000. So we're innovators of internet radio, and we help artists get their music out to the global audience, and we help jazz events also reach a global audience. So that's what we do for work for the last 23 years.
Great.
Yeah.
So let's get into cruising. Starting with your first cruise, take us through your dad's entree into the cruising industry.
Uh,
I'm kidding, Donna. I know that your first cruise was when you were 11 months old, so you can't start with that one. But I understand you did kind of leave your mark on that cruise.
yeah. Yeah. We went on when I was a little baby, and was on the Ariadne, or the Bahama Star was actually, I think the first one. The Ariadne was the second one, from the Eastern Steamship Lines. And we took a lovely picture, which I think I've shown you, Paul, and I think you might have it in your book.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
and I will share it when I promo this podcast. Believe
yeah.
me.
Great. Great. Yeah. It's with a lovely blonde captain with his white suit on. And apparently the diapers weren't so great back then, but we got through the photo. So my dad later on, when I was a little older child on board, we would eat at the captain's table a lot. And his famous last words were, "Don't embarrass me, please." And that, for a 3-year-old with carrot sticks and an olive dish in front of them, it never went well. But luckily they thought I was cute, so I got away with it.
So seriously, talk about your dad's entrance into the industry.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've actually learned more about this after my dad passed. Um, it's hard to not be have him here with me to tell his stories, but then I learned so much more by going through his things. And what basically my dad did was he worked for Morrisons Cafeteria all through the South, very popular cafeteria chain. Everyone would go after church. That place was packed when I would go as a kid. And they figured out how to do that home cooking that everyone loved. And they'd all go get in the cafeteria line, and then they'd tell the people behind the line what they wanted. Give me a little macaroni and cheese, a little, potatoes, whatever, coleslaw, and they go down the line. Well, right around that time in the 50s, they were transitioning transatlantic cruising, which was mostly a class level deal. You had to have money to be on the upper decks of a cruise ship.
Mm-hmm.
If you were just coming across to get a ride across the Atlantic, you were in steerage, basically, is what they called it. And you were down there like where the crew sleeps, right? But so around that time, they were trying to figure out how we could extend cruising to the average person that could afford it. And so they wanted to come up with a way to serve food that wasn't all fine dining. That kind of, average Americans didn't really understand. They didn't really know. They couldn't afford, didn't want. So how can we revamp the food for cruising to the Bahamas or the Caribbean islands? So they came to my dad in Morrison's, and they hired Morrison's Cafeteria as a caterer for Eastern Steamship. And that's what I didn't understand. I thought they just hired my dad. They hired the whole company. But he was sent because he had flipped so many of those cafeterias into being profitable. And he had made them so efficient that that's what they wanted. They wanted someone to come in and say, how can we revamp the whole structure of serving food on a cruise ship? So that's where, and they moved him to Miami, and he started from there.
Mm-hmm. He left that Eastern Steamship and bounced around a little bit. I don't mean bounced around looking for something to do, but he went to a couple of places before he went to Carnival. Talk about that.
Yeah, Carnival wasn't even around yet at that point. They'd come on in the mid 70s, early to mid 70s, but he was working with Commodore. But right before he got with Commodore, he tried to venture out on his own because he had bought 3 restaurants in Miami, and he even developed a home delivery food service for like home cooked meals that people were used to serving at night but didn't have time
Mm-hmm.
to cook. So even I was impressed that they were doing that in the 60s. I had no idea that basically Uber Eats was already invented
Right.
back in the 60s in South Florida. So he had that. He had his 3 restaurants downtown, and he got in the contract for the Jamaica Queen. And this very wealthy gentleman had bought the ship and hired my dad to do all the food and beverage. So he had quite a business running. He adopted myself and my brother. He had a burgeoning family. And the gentleman called him up and said, Everett, I've just decided I'm going to sell the Jamaica Queen. And that was the anchor of his business. That was the main income. So he folded up everything else, and he basically told his investors, which were friends and family, I did my best, but I don't have the funds to make it work. And I remember being a little girl having to go sit down at the warehouse and watch him liquidate everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hard to watch. I didn't really understand it, but I knew he was down about it. So he got a call from Commodore and he went to work, but this is my dad right here. He wouldn't work for a cruise line for the company itself. He wanted to have his own company that he could run his way because he organized in a really efficient way, and a lot of companies didn't do that. So he formed Sea Chest and Associates, and he hired his secretary and everybody that stayed with him throughout his whole career into Carnival. And he basically ran all the concessions, including photography, food and bars, and the gift shops for Commodore Cruise Lines in the 70s. And that's when I sailed a lot. We were always told as kids, you can have fun on the ships, but if something's too full, like the show is too full, you need to get out of the seats and give it to paying customers. So we were on the ships, but we were never, like if there was no room in the dining room for us, Paul, we had to go down to the crew mess and eat down there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we sailed.
So what was Commodore like?
Commodore was awesome. Back in the 70s, cruising was such a new industry. The port was new. It was a lot smaller. There was a turn basin. The ships weren't so big. And the crew that ran the whole thing was small. So you knew everybody. You knew their families. You knew their kids. And they all kept up with each other, went to each other's houses for parties. It was truly like a big family back then.
Now, talk about the dancing waiters.
Oh, man. So back then, now, it wasn't just that he started. I didn't realize this, but he was one of the innovators of the Midnight Buffet. So he was trying to come up with all these new approaches to dining and, people just not going and sitting down and having a meal, but having an experience. That was what he was aiming for. So he had been hiring from the Caribbean a lot. And even though with Eastern Steamship, he had literally traveled the world to hire crew from every country in the world that he could find them. On Commodore, they mostly were working out of the Caribbean islands. A lot of these guys were really good at dancing. They were really good at carrying food on their head. They could put trays of food and just carry it out to you on their head. They were really good at this. And the audience, the diners loved it. So he got an idea that if he could install a speaker system and play music and get the waiters to dance, he could do theme nights. So he'd do French night, Italian night, all these different themes. And he finally started buying them costumes. And they'd put something on the top and they'd change their hats or something. And that would be a different theme night. So the first song he came out with, which was, wasn't it Buster Poindexter at the time, or they did Hot, Hot, Hot?
He
he redid
it.
He did it.
Yeah,
that's right. Hot, Hot, Hot is a lovely song.
I forget the gentleman's name. It's in the book, but it was originally done.
Yeah.
In the Caribbean.
That's right. So he figured that'd be perfect, right? So he taught them all to dance. They were kind of reluctant, but then they got in on it, and boy, it took off. They got such a great reaction that he started making up other songs and other dances, and you see that today on the Carnival ships. You see the remnants of that now.
Now, I understand he moved from Commodore to what then was Chandris, which today is Celebrity. Talk about that.
That's right. It was, Chandris was owned by a Greek company, and they sailed out of Piraeus. And we didn't really understand why my dad was leaving to go do a job. We thought he would come and go, but they didn't have the money for that back then. It was 76, 77 were the years. And my mom, I remember I was going off to 6th grade, and she said, I got to tell you guys something. Your dad is going to try something new, and he's going to run his own concession, but the ships are in Europe. So he's going to work for Chandris running all their food and beverage. And we didn't really understand. We said, okay, so he's going to do what he always does, but where? Europe. Where's that? Well, it's far away, and you're not going to see him for months at a time. And it was very sad, but we thought, well, we'll see how it goes. But he got over there, and he got everything settled. And back then, they would actually have to carry cash because they didn't have cards to put any money on. So he invited us over. He got us a cabin, 2 cabins, which my brother and I were thrilled with, that we could have our very own cabin. And he got him in the back of the ship because, again, we don't take anything from a paying customer. So we were called in the boom boom room. We were back there by the propellers, but we got to go to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So that was pretty cool. And we flew over on like 5 legs through Miami to New York to England, switch airports, go to Morocco, and all the way to Greece. And by the time we got there, I'm telling you, on Royal Air Morocco, there were chickens and goats on the plane. I'm not kidding you. I'd never seen anything like it. And all the while, where in the heck are we? All the while, he had my little brother, carrying a silver bullet suitcase, which he told him to keep his eye on. And we didn't know what was in that. We got it all the way to Greece. It turns out it was cash and coins because they needed American money.
Mm-hmm.
So we were literally carrying cash, but he didn't want us to know what it was because, he didn't want us to be in trouble with anything. So we brought it over and we sailed for a month all throughout the Mediterranean, saw the pyramids, went to all the special places in Jerusalem and all the places in the Med that the ships go to now. But we got to see a lot more back then because the world was a different place and it was a little safer. So, and then we went back the next year when I was in 7th grade to the Baltic and went to Russia and all around the countries around the Baltic and got to go to Moscow, and it was amazing. It was just incredible. And then when we came home, he said he'd had enough, and they had been calling him from Carnival. Zonas had been calling him, Mr. Zonas and Ted Arison. And they said, won't you come and please come talk to us now? You've had your 2 years in Europe. Are you ready to come? And he said, I don't want to be away from my family anymore. I'm going to give up my own concession. Didn't go well with the way the Greeks ran everything. So I think Chandris sold after that. And he went off to Carnival, and he told Ted Arison, I'll work for you on one condition. You have a terrible reputation with paying your bills. All my vendors for forks and knives and linens and food, they will not work with you. They do not like you guys. So I will work with you and use my good name if I get to put my company Sea Chest back together. And that's what he did. And only because of that, he could then call, and let's say the bread guy hadn't been paid. My dad could say, okay, Carnival didn't pay you, but I'm going to pay you. And if I give you my word, you're going to get paid. Mm-hmm. So Ted Arison gave my dad a $50,000 budget. And in 78, that was a lot of money. And he told him, don't come back for more. And he had to make it work. He said the first month, they lost money. The second month, they broke even. And the third month, they turned a profit and never looked back.
Great.
Yeah.
So take us through his Carnival, his, exemplary, iconic Carnival career.
My dad wouldn't do anything halfway. Everything he did had to be done to the nth degree. So that paid off with cruising because you have to hit those marks with the USPH, the health department. Mm-hmm. So he was my dad would come home in a bad mood. It's because they got a 90 or a 95%. He wanted 100%. Mm-hmm. He didn't want any problems. So that's why I think they respected him. His crew respected him. And when they started out with the 3 ships, that was more like a family, like Commodore. So they really knew my dad. But my dad had a policy where he would give you one chance, and he'd tell you how he wants something done. And if you miss the mark, he'd give you one chance to correct it. And he didn't matter how much he liked you. Didn't matter how much he believed in you. If it didn't work out to his level of what he expected, he fired you. Mm-hmm. So they respected him, and they knew he meant business, and he'd do what he said he was going to do. He also backed his crew. He fought for them. I paid his bills on time. So he was well respected in the industry. John Heald was a funny story. John Heald, the famous, cruise director. Now he's the ambassador, kind of. He was a bar waiter, and he came to work for my dad. And my dad told him, you got to do better than this, because bar waiters have to sell. They got to sell. And he wasn't hitting the numbers. So he got his one chance, and he said, John, you might want to find another avenue to work in Carnival, because you're not working in my department. So that's when he went off to work in the entertainment sector of the cruise ship. Mm-hmm. But so they laugh about that. They used to laugh about that even to the end. But yeah, he revamped the galleys. He revamped the gift stores, and he ended up meeting his second wife, who was the love of his life, Diane Phillips, who was working, he hired her to run all the gift stores. And she worked at the merchandise mart in Miami. And he heard about her and he put her in charge of all the gift shops. And man, she took them like to the nth degree. It was class all the way. About that time, Farcus had come in. The ships were getting designed in a beautiful way. He was coming up with all these fun designs. And my dad felt like the dining rooms should be as fun. So he worked with Farcus on really fun designs for the dining room. He came up with innovations for the dining room so that the waiters could move in and out of the tables better and do their dances. The side stands that they jump up on, that was also so that they could bring their food out. Those trays are stacked pretty tall, so they needed places to put them.
Mm-hmm.
And so he designed all that so there'd be flow. And then Farcus threw him a curveball. I want to do split level dining rooms, upstairs, downstairs. And my dad said, I don't know how that's going to work. I can't have my people running up and downstairs, not on a moving cruise ship. And he talked to one of his good friends, Pietro Dodaro, who was the head engineer. And Pietro even said, this is not going to work. Ted Harrison looked at my dad and said, you better make it work. So he got busy with Pietro. They worked out the first escalator at sea for the galleys. And they even came up with a blue light that sits at the entranceway so that any tables sitting near the galley cannot smell the food. The blue light kills all of the aroma and all of the bacteria.
Wow.
So just very like huge soup pots that were on hinges so that as the ship listed, the soup pots wouldn't slide off of the stove. Everything moves with the ship, right? Down in the laundry even. He came up with a rack system so the towels or the linens wouldn't snag after they came out of the dryer, so that his guys could just pull them off the shelves and he wouldn't lose linens.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me one dinner they had to save money at one point, and he literally took one olive off the salads fleet wide. I think they were at 26 ships at that point. And he said it saved him millions of dollars to take one olive off all the salads.
That reminds me, in terms of revenue generation, that reminds me of the story you told me after Joe Farcus designed the wing funnel. You know what I'm talking about. So, tell that story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, after he designed the wing funnel, my dad got an idea that they should make a funnel glass, and I don't know do they still even have this glass? You went on one of the recent big ships, right? The Mardi Gras.
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
No, they don't have it anymore. That's a classic.
They don't take my word for it, because I drank plenty, but it was never out of a winged funnel glass.
Yeah. So my dad came up with the idea to make a funnel glass, and but it was a big hit because he said, listen, if we do this specialty glass, they can take it with them, and we'll do a drink of the day. And man, they sold like hotcakes. That's all. And then you get on board the day you're going to bon voyage, right? And back then we had confetti. They'd hand you the confetti and the streamers, and then they'd be walking around with these colorful drinks, all in their nice, outfits. And boy, they sold a lot of drinks while people were in that, fun mood. So that was a huge revenue thing for them.
Now, I know that a lot of the innovations that you talk about, some of the ones, maybe they're not real sexy, but they're behind the scenes and make life easier for the crew. But and I'm sure many of them are still in place today. But the one innovation that passengers can see today, which is very, very visible, which is ubiquitous on a cruise ship and at the ports, are the photographers. Talk about that.
Yeah, this was my dad's secret, pleasure. Everyone knew him as the food and beverage guy, but my dad loved photography. All the way to the end of our traveling together, he was still upgrading his camera to the latest, Lumix, Panasonic Lumix with the 30 times, enlargement and stuff like this. And I realized over the course of traveling with him how much he loved photography as much as he loved the food and beverage department. I think it was more of his passion. So he came up with the idea that he would do the fun cutouts when you get off of the ship, and you'd have the name of the port. And then he realized he could have those printed and then sell them on board. So, of course, people would want to remember all the ports they went to. Then he came up with the idea of doing all the photos down the promenade deck. And then he came up with the idea of doing the photos in the dining room. Any idea he could come up, any way that he could see that people might want a photo. Because here's the secret, Paul. He wanted that photo for himself. When we traveled together, if there was a sign, if there was some way to mark where he had been in the world, he wanted me to take his picture there.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized if you are a poor son of the South, that means a lot to a person who grows up in a Depression era time,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So he never lost that. I think through photography, it was a way for him to see his life as being successful, and that he'd always say, "Can you believe this little country boy is in this whatever country we were in? Can you believe I made it this far?" And photography was the way to do it. And I think he wanted to give that to everybody else, give them a fun time. And even when he would sail alone at the end to go get his bottle on the ceremony of whatever new ship they'd come out with, if we weren't available to go with him, he'd go on his own. And he'd go to every photo op that he helped create.
Mm-hmm.
He'd go get his picture taken, even if it was the formal one where he'd look to the side. Oh, he did it. He loved it.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Mr. Phillips going to those ships after he retired. But one other question: while he was working on Carnival and you were cruising a lot on Carnival, what was for you the most memorable event or aspect of your dad's career at Carnival?
Man,
You saw a number of christenings of ships. I've got a photo of you, or at least of your dad, with the Schulers, but it might have been something a lot less significant than that. What for you stands out?
with cruising with him, you mean? Like when I was younger and he was in his career?
Yeah, during the Carnival days.
I think the most impressive thing was the respect he got. I mean, wherever we'd go on the ship, we taught to be humble, but if they knew who I was based on my last name, I was respected and I was taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because of the good that my dad had done for others. And we sit down at dinner for him. He'd be there maybe 5 minutes because something would happen and he needed to go fix it. But he could literally look across the dining room and people would see him, that would, like the waiters, and they'd come to the table with a look. I'd never seen that kind of power before.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes he'd just hold up a fork and then all of a sudden a guy would appear and I thought, "What are you doing?" And the guy would see him across the dining room. And "Yes, Mr. Phillips, what is it? This is bent. We don't serve forks like this. They need to go away." "Oh, yes, sir. We'll get this out here, get this fixed." And I'm not saying that, Paul, from a power monger standpoint. I'm saying it because he literally was watched from every angle. And here's the famous story of my dad. And Ken Byrne will tell you the story because he was a victim of it. My dad would appear through walls. This is the most famous thing about Mr. Phillips. He's quiet. He's a quiet man. And he would literally, they'd be in the galley. There'd be all this hubbub going on and this and that. What are we going to do? And they'd turn around and there he'd be. And they'd say, "Oh, when did you get here?" And he'd have a little black book. And he'd just look up and not say anything and keep writing his notes. "What do you think that meant? What do you think? Is it about me? Do you think we did something?" And he told me later when we were on this long trip together, he said, "You know what was in that book? Nothing. It was all perception." That they knew that I could be anywhere at any time. And so they watched what they were doing at all times and trying to live up to that standard because he would literally just appear. So I'd never known a parent or a person with that kind of power, just for being quiet.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was what was the most impressive thing. And he was giddy on the ships.
After your dad retired in, correct me if I'm wrong, 1997?
Yeah.
You and he went on a series of bucket list cruises together. Tell our listeners some of the blissful details.
Well, first, I started traveling with him the last 6 years of his life more often, but we did some bigger trips before that. He went to Japan and China twice, actually, with he and his friends and his wife. So he did a lot of trips on his own, while still being a consultant for Carnival for many years, and going to the builds in Finland and all to oversee it.
Mm-hmm.
But then once he was completely free, and once his wife passed away, we started traveling together around 2015. And we did, the first trip was out to Tahiti, where he invited my brother and his wife, and my partner and I went. And we had a really fun time on the Oceana cruise around Tahiti. And then he called me up and said, "Hey, would you all be interested in going to Galapagos?" I said, "Heck yeah." So he got in us a trip on Silver Seas. I'd never been on a ship that small. So we went out and joined him for that. And that was just phenomenal. The expedition cruises were a whole nother league for me. It wasn't just about sipping drinks and partying on the ship. It was really about exploring the world.
Mm-hmm.
And he loved that. So we saw Ecuador and the Galapagos. Soon as we were flying home, he said, "I'm thinking about going to Easter Island next, because you had me read that book about the Moais there. Would you be interested in that?" And I thought, "Well, man, Dad, I'm trying to build a company here. I'll find time. I'm not retired." But Sandy told me, she said, my partner, she said, "If I can't go, you still need to go. You don't know how much time you have with your dad." So we went to Easter Island, came back to Chile, and took a flight to get on the Amazon cruise. Went down the Amazon River on the Peruvian, and he had fallen on the hike around the quarry in Easter Island and hurt his knee. And he had to admit to me something was up. So I had my eye on him. Well, here we are out in the Amazon, and he slipped on a log step that we were on in the jungle, and he hurt his other knee. So here's the man. He was by then 80, I think 80, 81, and he had hurt both knees, and nothing stopped him. He still put on his trousers and his boots every day, went out. And then we went up to Cusco, and we went to Machu Picchu. And I watched him make sure he didn't fall off the edge. But yeah, he hiked all over Machu Picchu with two bad knees. Went home, and my cousin was scheduled to go on, I think, the Vista with him. And the doctor had to tell him, "Mr. Phillips, you're not going anywhere. You busted both your knees." He was going to get on another ship. So we've been around South America for 49 days, from Fort Lauderdale around the Horn to San Francisco. And after that cruise, he and I loved it so much we didn't want to get off the ship. He wanted to take another ship back through the Panama Canal. We've been to, one of my favorites was Denali. We took a train ride up to Denali, saw Denali together, went out on the tundra, went helicoptering onto a glacier, and then flew on a biplane down to meet the ship.
Oh, wow.
It was amazing, Paul, to watch the glacier go all the way to the ocean, with the trickle of water.
And I can picture that a lot more than I could when when I interviewed you for the book, because I just came back from Alaska.
Isn't it great?
Yeah. Oh yeah. We'll definitely do it again.
If you can go all the way
It
to
wasn't
Denali,
just checking it off my bucket list, because it's still on my bucket list. I got to do it again.
you got to do it again. And if you can go to Denali, go, because Princess and Holland America have a beautiful resort in there, a beautiful restaurant. My dad and I loved it. We didn't stay at that one. We stayed at the one next door because we were on Seabourn. But beautiful place up there in Healy, Alaska. You've got to do Denali.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a pre-cruise thing. And then you come down and get on the ship. And because we were on a smaller ship, we got to go in and take the Zodiac to see glaciers we wouldn't have seen.
Mm-hmm.
And he got funny at the end. He wouldn't get off in Juneau or Ketchikan because he'd been there so many times. His first time to Alaska was with the Tropical.
Mm-hmm.
That was their fifth ship, I think. And they'd gotten into Alaska. Carnival had.
Now, Seabourn is an ultra luxury line. That's owned by the Carnival Corporation, right?
Yeah. Now, when Mickey took over, he started buying all the other cruise lines, and then Royal Caribbean did the same. So they've got Princess. I think Princess is part of it. Seabourn, Cunard, Holland America are all owned by Carnival.
Mm-hmm.
So we really enjoyed Seabourn. We took Seabourn from Dubai to Singapore, all around India. We went to Oman. We went to Malaysia and Indonesia. Those ships are great for the smaller ports and the harder to reach places. But I tell you what, the level of service is phenomenal. And no matter what ship we were on, they knew my dad because they had heard from someone at Carnival Mr. Phillips is coming. And I just couldn't believe how many people, they were just very respectful to him.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But it was wild to watch him fade out after a while. Like, they were told who he was. They didn't know who he was. So that was something I had to adjust to.
So the last cruise you and your dad sailed together on Carnival was in the Mediterranean, I believe in 2016 on the Carnival Vista. And I know that cruise had some special significance besides being, of course, the last cruise you all sailed together on Carnival. Say something about that.
Yeah, Dad had come over for our festival that we hosted in Mallorca, Spain, and he had really gotten to know all the artists we were promoting there, and they loved him. The hotel owners loved him, and then he took off to see some friends in Sicily for a week, and we all met up again in Barcelona to go on the Vista. And it wasn't the inaugural; it was the second cruise. He usually hit all the inaugurals if he could, or he'd do a crossing. That was his favorite way to cruise Carnival. And they would always do a bottle ceremony when he would come on board. And what that is he had helped the Divines, Rosalie Divine and Michael Divine, Divine Wines. They were the first wine distributor to get California wines on the menu of Carnival ships. And my dad helped promote that. So in order to say thank you to my dad, and they were also very, very close friends, every ship that Carnival launched, they would do a bottle ceremony, and the Divines would donate a Jeroboam, a huge bottle of wine, and they would engrave the name of the ship on the bottle and give it to my dad. And that was the way of saying thanks. So we got to be a part of that ceremony that John Heald and Ken Byrne were a part of, and the captain and the entire staff of the ship comes. And it's a very nice event. And so the Vista Cruise was so cool because I think that was one of the first roller coasters, or not roller coasters, maybe one of the first. It was like a roller coaster.
Yeah,
they had like
is it the Skyrider? You paddle. Yeah, yes.
Yes. I've got a picture of my 80-something-year-old dad in the Skyrider, because it didn't matter, Paul. Whatever ship he went on, he had to try the latest thing. Anyway, so the Vista was great because my dad got to play on the ship. And we did Europe as we normally did. We did all the tours together and ran up all the stairs of all the cathedrals and all that. But it wasn't even about the ports. It was about being with him on the ship. And even when we weren't in the big dining room, we moved to the small dining room where Ken was, because he wanted to be where Ken was. Ken would sing to him every night, and my dad would sit and dance in his chair. And man, he never grew tired of cruising. He became a great passenger. As someone who helped build the whole thing, he just became a really good passenger. I know this is not visual. Your podcast is not visual. I know that. But I want to show you something. Do you see this? This is a model of the Jubilee. It's the old Jubilee. On the back deck there is where they invented the first Lido deck. The Jubilee was the first Lido deck ever invented, partly because we hounded my dad when we were kids that we didn't want to change out of our bathing suits to go to lunch in a fine dining restaurant. So the Jubilee, when I was moving to California, he said, please come see this latest ship design, because we always saw the new designs. And that's when he showed us that they had brought the Morrisons Cafeteria food service up to the pool deck. So I just wanted to make that note that was kind of a huge change. And we enjoyed eating up on the Lido from there on after. Come on, that was a huge thing, for everybody. Now we just take it for granted that we can eat by the pool. You got to keep in mind, they didn't make a ship's galley to be up that high, so they had to re-engineer the whole galley to get food from the lower galley up to the top. So that was what was involved in that.
But most of the current generation of cruisers have no idea that there existed Lido decks with no food. Final trip with your dad was on Amadeus Star, a river cruise on the Danube in the fall of 2019.
Yeah, we had done a Windstar cruise around the Greek islands in July. We went straight to Oslo and caught the ship and did the Norwegian fjords on Oceania right after the Greek islands. He packed it in, man. And then when my cousin and my dad, we all flew our separate ways. We met up about a month later, and we drove over the Balkans from Budapest, Hungary, to meet him in Sofia, Bulgaria. And we toured the country and then went down and caught the ship. And that was our last trip together. Now, he had told my cousin and I on the Norwegian cruise in the fjords, he came down like a schoolboy one day and said, guess what I did? And I said, what? I said, I called Seabourn. And the ship that we love is going on a world cruise next year in 2020. And I'm going to get on it for my birthday in January. And I'm going to go around the world. And I said, and I can't go with you because I run a company. So you're going to have to take all your own photos. And he said, no problem, I'll do it. And I said, okay, Dad, we'll stay in contact. And I'm so happy for you. So we did this Danube cruise. It was amazing to be on a river cruise. He'd never done a river cruise. And we saw all of Eastern Europe and walked all over the place. And we said goodbye in Prague. We had 2 days in Prague together. And the last picture he took was with a U of F buddy, University of Florida friend. And they had the flag in front of him. And I had this great last picture of him from the ship. And that was when we said goodbye. And about a few weeks later, November, he called me and said, you're not going to believe what happened. The non-Hodgkin's lymphoma I had 13 years ago, my one kidney, it came back. And I said, it doesn't matter. You're going to fight it. He had to cancel that world cruise. And unfortunately, it got the best of him.
Mm-hmm.
So he was gone by April of 2020. But, Paul, I was well advised by all my friends and family to never say no to that man. And I'm so glad I didn't, because we saw Iceland. We saw everything from Iceland to, like I said, Easter Island, India, everything together. And for me, being a kid who chased my dad around ships because he was so in demand for all that he ran on the ships, to just sit with him and cruise with him was an honor of my lifetime, to have 6 years with him, to just see things. Like, he didn't even care about beer that much.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd go find all the pubs with me because I'm a beer lover, and he'd sit and try beers with me. And for a daughter, that's huge, to get 6 more years with her dad. And I do wish he had gone around the world. But I'll have to do it one day and bring his ashes with me.
Poignant story, and your planned ending is one that, and I wrote about that. Your goal to do it and bring his ashes. I don't want to sound that my eyes watered. So
yeah, thank you.
Well, Donna, before we let you go, I know, because I've heard you say it, you've got a company to run. So I don't want to hold you. Just a couple of light, even fun cruise questions. Kind of lighten the mood. What's your favorite cruise drink and cruise food?
I've gotten in the most trouble on the painkiller.
There you go. I like. Oh, yes, I like.
Yeah.
I research. I love coconut, and I was drinking like 70% pina coladas on a cruise ship, and I said, what else can I get that has coconut in it? And so painkiller is one that came up. So I know it now.
We discovered that one in St. Croix on a pier party they had. And man, they had the things where if you got to 4, they just call the ambulance for you.
How about food? What do you like to eat?
Well, I know a favorite on Carnival is the chocolate melting cake, but that wasn't my jam. I mean, I like healthier food, so I like any of the. I'll tell you what's a favorite. The Indian cooks would cook an Indian breakfast for us sometimes, and we go upstairs and have a little private thing. I love the Indian food that they cook for us. That was one of my favorites.
My favorite on Carnival is escargot.
Oh, I love the escargot on Carnival. No, you're right. That I agree with that. And I ordered every
other
time.
lines. I was my last cruise. I was on NCL, and they had it in the specialty. It was in the French restaurant. You got to pay extra for it.
Yes.
But Carnival, I used to get it like more than one time a cruise. So.
Oh, if I could get it, whatever nights they had it, I get it.
Okay. How about what's your most memorable, happiest, funniest, or even most embarrassing cruise or port experience?
Okay, by far, this is the number one. We almost missed the ship in Valparaiso, Chile. And my dad told me, since I was a youngster that if I didn't get back, when he let me off on my own, he said, if you don't make it back, we will not hold the ship for you. Do you understand? And I said, yeah, I understand. So, man, I was always Johnny on the spot. Well, we went out with a couple of guys we'd met on board, and they had convinced us to take the bus, the city bus. And I didn't speak any Spanish at the time. They did. And they kept asking the guy if he was heading towards the port. And he kept saying he was, but he was going up the hills. We found ourselves on top of the mountains, as far away from the ship as you can get. We could still see the ship, but we were about to go over the mountains. We demanded to get off the bus, didn't have cell service that would work. This was around the South America trip. And my dad, I knew, was on board by then. We'd had 2.5 hours to get back to the ship, more than enough time. Came back down, I told the guy to get another bus that was going down the hill and tell him what was up and take us to the port. And the guy just complained the whole way. We got off of his bus, landed in some town in the mountains, begging for a taxi. The police had to come help us, tell the taxi driver to pick us up because he kept driving past us because we were tourists. Get down to the port. The port director has been meeting with the captain on board the Splendor. Port director comes over, sees us in a tizzy trying to get into the port. The bow of the ship was right in front of me. And the guy took his gun out and said, get back. You're not coming in this way. You have to go around to the tourist entrance. I said, sir, we won't make it. And the port director sees us and comes out and says, don't worry. I just met with the captain. You'll be fine. They're not going to leave yet. And he's speaking like half, Spanglish. So he gets us back on the bus, another bus, and we're in traffic, inching our way a mile down the road. And Sandy says, call your dad. And I said, no, I can't. He's told me my whole life. Turn around. She's got him on the phone. And this is all I hear. Donna, what have you done? I said, Dad, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. I didn't do it. And he's like, we can't hold the ship for you. I was like, I know, but I don't have my passport on me and I don't know how I'm going to make it to the next thing. All right, well, I'll see what I can do, but I can't hold the ship for you. So I'm sweating bullets. We come to the thing where you put your security line, and this lady who has a tour of elderly people on board comes over, this British lady, not very helpful, and says to me, they've already pulled the gangway and I'm dying. I've never missed a ship in my life. And I said, Sandy, oh my gosh. She said, I said, wait, then why are you here? Well, my bus is late. Otherwise, they would have pulled the gangway and you would have missed the ship. And I said, lady, you're not helping. So I put my stuff through security, got on the bus, and I saw a crew member get on. I said, phew, crew members coming. I know they're holding the ship. I go and I get on board and I go to my dad's cabin, and he's got a picture of me and Sandy and the two guys coming on the gangway because he was terrified. Turns out he had called the hotel director and they had told him, don't worry, the ship's running late anyway. But Paul, they get charged for being in port even 1 minute late. So that's my biggest memory.
Yeah, I've heard that, and I had no idea, and I've heard it's pretty expensive.
Oh, it's like, yeah, it can be like $10,000 for being an hour over.
Right.
So they take off, and that's the one thing. That's an Everette Phillips epitome story. Is that he loves me, he'll do what he can for me, but ultimately we're all responsible for ourselves.
I tell you, I have never been a pier runner, but even as you were telling that story, I was kind of like feeling uneasy because, oh my goodness, that to me, that's probably the worst thing that could happen is to miss a ship. I know there are worse things, but I'm a cruise addict. And so, that's something, as they say, when I used to be in business in corporate, what keeps you awake at night?
Yeah. And that's what I would say is that my dad working on the ships could always take the pilot boat out and he catch the ship, but we can't, us cruisers can't do that. Right. So that's what my advice to be to all your listeners is plan an extra hour to be near the pier before that ship leaves, because they will leave your butt. And you have to fly yourself to the next port. But a fun memory is dancing with the crew and all the dances they did in the dining room. Those are my most fun memories, bar none.
The hot days.
And all of it. They did a Michael Jackson tribute 1 year on the Splendor because they had all that time, 49 days we were out there. And that was a blast to learn like all the different moves they were doing. It was really complicated. They came up with a whole routine. That was some fun times. That was super fun.
Well, Donna, finally, I know that you have a lot of friends through both the cruising world and the smooth jazz world. So,
Yes.
welcome to the Donna K friends joining us today. I hope you all come back. Share one thing that my listeners and your friends don't know about Donna.
Okay. As much as I like being on ships, I also took to paddling myself across large bodies of water with my all-female crew of outriggers, and we took a Hawaiian canoe, and 6 of us, well, a team of 10, swapping out. We paddled the Triple Crown. That means we went from Newport Beach, California to Catalina Island, and we paddled 4 hours to get there. And then we did around Kona, 18 miles, and then we did the Molokai crossing to Oahu, 47 miles across the sea with my crew. And then we came home and paddled from Santa Cruz, California, across the Monterey Bay to my home, which took 4 hours. But we were the first female crew ever to do, from Monterey, to do all those races.
Wow.
And I have a tattoo that says, which you can't see it, listeners, but it's on my left arm, and it says, "No horizon too distant." And the whole tattoo is a sailing ship with all of the nautical map accoutrement on it. And that is my feeling is, I call it blue line therapy. The farther out to sea I can be, the calmer I feel.
There you go.
Yeah.
One wonderful way to end. Donna, it has been great talking to you again. Thank you so much for coming on the Joy of Cruising podcast. And thank you for being in the Joy of Cruising again.
Thank you for, Paul, I can't thank you enough. You do me a great honor by even caring to know my dad's story. So thank you very much for caring enough to do this.
All righty. All the best to you and smoothjazz.com.
Thank you.
And as they say, I'll see you on the ocean.
I'll see you out there.
The Joy of Cruising and Cruising Interrupted, each $16.99 plus shipping, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again, for $18.99, can be ordered at the link on thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com. For each of the 3 books, use the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast and get $4 off. The Joy of Cruising books are also available at Amazon. Order the ebook at Amazon or your favorite online retailer. Stay in touch by joining the Joy of Cruising Podcast Facebook group or following the Joy of Cruising Podcast on Instagram. We're constantly adding new shows. Please leave a review and tell a friend about us. We hope you enjoyed this brief escape to the ocean. See you next week.